What will you do if you were at a funeral and the person who is supposed to be buried showed up? Would you freak out? I mean, I would. In this video, we are counting down the top 10 people who attended their own funerals. Number 10. Kong Chanyang. Kong suffered from a mental illness. During the day, his family left him chained in their home, a common practice in Cambodia. However, one day in 2014, he managed to slip out of the chains. His family searched for him, but they could not find him. A few days later, a decomposing body was spotted in a nearby river. His family believed that the body was Kong's, and they arranged a funeral for him. However, they froze when Kong showed up. Mourners were terrified at Kong's appearance, and most of them ran away. They were afraid that a ghost was haunting them. Kong's father was among those who fled, but he stopped when Kong yelled for him. He walked up to his son, grabbed his hand, and told the family that his son was no ghost. Number 9. Timothy Dexter. Eccentric 18th century millionaire Timothy Dexter wanted to know what people thought about him. He decided to hold a mock funeral, hide, and see how his death affected the guests. Dexter sent out a notice which claimed he had died, and his family invited people to his funeral. Over 3,000 people attended the ceremony. Dexter's family greeted the mourners. The grieving guests were led inside and seated in front of an extravagant coffin. A man, who Dexter had hired to pose as a priest, read a long eulogy which Dexter had written. After he finished speaking, the coffin was carried to the garden and buried. A feast followed the service. However, the meal was interrupted by a loud noise coming from the kitchen. The guests opened the door and saw Dexter beating his wife. He was angry because he thought that she had not cried enough during the service. Number 8. Ademir Goncalves. Several of Ademir's relatives identified him as the victim of a car crash in 2009. The corpse was severely injured, but its clothing was similar to what Ademir had been wearing. His family began preparing the funeral, which was to take place the next day. Ademir's body was placed in a casket. The family walked by to pay their respects to the deceased man. His mother looked at the coffin for a long time. She could not believe the body belonged to her son. She was right. The corpse was not his. Her son had spent the night at a truck stop talking with friends over drinks. He had no idea that his family thought he was dead. Ademir didn't hear about his funeral until it was taking place. He rushed to it and told his relatives that he was alive. His unexpected arrival terrified his family, and some of them tried to jump out a window. Before I continue, I just want to remind you to subscribe to our channel if you haven't already for more amazing videos. Number 7. Mohammed Rayhan. In 2015, the Syrian town of Douma was bombed by the government. Several people were killed in the market where native Mohammed Rayhan was working that day. After failing to return home, his family presumed he was dead. They planned and held a funeral for him. While he wasn't dead, he was a victim of the bombing. He'd been trapped for 36 hours under rubble. Eventually, he made it out alive. The funeral lasted several days, and on the last day, Rayhan showed up to the funeral to the delight of his family. Number 6. Zhang Dayan. In Chinese culture, the dead are believed to have the exact needs as the living. Families are expected to arrange for the funerals and pay regular visits to the deceased's grave. Zhang Dayan worried that no one would take care of him after he died because he never married or had children. In 2016, he decided to organize a mock funeral, and he invited his friends and family. Around 40 of his loved ones attended, along with several hundred curious people from nearby villages. Zhang was delighted with his ceremony. He enjoyed watching the pretend mourners bow their heads in prayer at his feet. Zhang even crawled into his fake grave toward the end of the funeral. His mock funeral also included a mock wedding to a dead woman, as it is seen as unlucky to go into the afterlife without a spouse. Number 5. Felix Bush Brazil. Felix Brazil spent 5 years planning his funeral. He was eager to hear what the preacher had to say about him, as he'd never married or had many friends. His bizarre funeral in 1938 gained national attention, and 8,000 people attended. Vendors sold soft drinks and hot dogs, and the spectacle had a carnival-like atmosphere. Felix arrived in a hearse, seated next to the driver. Guests mobbed him when he stepped out of the vehicle. He needed help from state troopers to get inside the funeral tent. He sat in a chair next to his self-made coffin, and he listened to the preacher give a eulogy. Hundreds of people approached him after the ceremony. Felix shook their hands and he signed autographs. He was pleased with the service, and he said that it was the best event he had attended. Number 4. Dragan and Drakica Marek. These people arranged their premature funeral in 2016. The couple had no children, and they wanted to organize a proper funeral for themselves before they died. The Merricks did not want anyone to have to pay for a funeral for them. The couple bought and raised their own tombstones, and then they sent out invitations to their funeral. Around 200 people showed up. Dragon gave a speech about the couple's love-filled life, and the pair told their loved ones goodbye. After the ceremony, the guests went to a traditional post-burial dinner in a local restaurant. Number 3. Frederick Ward. Frederick, aka Captain Thunderbolt, a 19th century outlaw, was called the Gentleman Bushranger. He never used violence, and he was always polite to his victims. Ward spent 6 years stealing from properties and holding up mail coaches. He gave away a lot of the money that he stole. One day in 1870, Ward was cornered by a constable, and he shot at the policeman as he fled. He tried to escape on his horse. However, the animal was exhausted after riding hard for nearly 2 miles. Ward was out of bullets, and the constable shot him. Ward's descendants doubt that the dead man was Frederick, as the bushranger had never shot at the police before. They believed that the deceased man was Frederick's uncle, Harry Ward. However, Frederick Ward's funeral went ahead. It was attended by a woman dressed in black, whose face was hidden by a veil. She walked with a manly gait. His family believes that it was Ward who had come to pay final respects to his uncle before he fled the country. Number 2. Gilberto Araujo. In 2012, the family members of Gilberto Araujo, a professional car washer from Brazil, were busy preparing for his funeral. They thought he'd been killed in an accident and that his body had been disfigured beyond recognition. As it turns out, Araujo wasn't dead at all. It was a case of mistaken identity. The actual body in the casket belonged to someone else, though Araujo's mother and family were unaware. After a call from a friend, Araujo sought to prove that he was, in fact, alive, so he showed up at his own funeral and caused simultaneous surprise and terror of his family. Some people even fled the service in panic at his seeming resurrection. Number 1. Noela Rukundo. While attending the funeral of her stepmother in Burundi in 2015, Rukundo was kidnapped from her hotel by several armed men. These men were working for her husband and intended to kill her at his request. Tied up in a chair and faced with the voice of her husband over speakerphone demanding the men kill her, Rukundo fainted. She regained consciousness sometime later, still being held by the men. Luckily, they didn't kill women because they knew Rukundo's brother. So they let her go. In the meantime, her husband had told everyone that Rukundo had died in a car accident and he planned her funeral service. In a shockingly dramatic move, Rukundo showed up to her own funeral telling everyone the truth. The husband thought he'd seen a ghost and admitted to everything. He spent 9 years in prison. Would you ever host your own funeral? Let me know in the comments below, and thanks for watching! If you liked this video, don't forget to hit subscribe for more wild topics just like this one. See you next time!